On this Saturday night, a critical condition in the latest ceasefire proposal. With Gaza grappling, world leaders push for a deal between Israel and Hamas.
It's time for this war to end.
As Ottawa vows to crack down on anti-Semitic attacks on home soil. Liftoff called off.
Hold.
Boeing's first crewed Starliner launch scrubbed in the final minutes. Political tides turn in South Africa. The party once led by Nelson Mandela loses its 30-year parliamentary majority. From tragedy to hope.
To redefine what this place is and not be defined by a couple hours of time.
How a new community center in Portapique is helping people heal after Canada's worst mass shooting.
Global National with Farah Nasser. Reporting tonight, Neetu Garcha.
You are looking at a shot of smoke rising from the direction of Rafah this morning as Israel's military offensive in the war-ravaged Gaza Strip continues. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been displaced from the town in southern Gaza. But today, amid the misery there, a glimmer of hope. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Israel proposing a draft ceasefire plan calling for an immediate 6-week halt to the hostilities. The first phase involves a partial withdrawal of Israeli forces from areas of Gaza and the release of some hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners and humanitarian aid. There is, however, one big sticking point. Israel refuses to make any deals so long as Hamas is in power. David Baxter has our top story tonight.
Israel continues its push into southern Gaza near Rafah, even after U.S. President Joe Biden presented a new ceasefire proposal Friday evening. Hamas is said to view the proposal positively, which includes an immediate 6-week ceasefire as some hostages and prisoners are exchanged before working towards an end to the fighting. Even though Biden repeatedly said this is an Israeli proposal, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued a statement Saturday morning saying the only way this proposal works for Israel is the freeing of all hostages and, quote, the destruction of Hamas's military and governing capabilities. The statement concludes saying the notion that Israel will agree to a permanent ceasefire before these conditions are fulfilled is a non-starter.
At this point, Hamas no longer is capable of carrying out another October 7th, which is one of Israel's main objectives in this war, and quite frankly, a righteous one.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau issued a statement late Friday night calling the proposal an opportunity to end the suffering and return to a path of peace, adding all parties must seize it. While campaigning for his re-election in the United Kingdom, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak joins the chorus of world leaders calling for this proposal to be accepted.
I hope Hamas take this opportunity to conclude the deal that's on the table, which will ensure that the hostages can be released and be back with their families, that we can flood Gaza with far more aid than has been getting in.
There's dire need for more aid as thousands remain displaced and Israel continues its offensive in Rafah. Aid organizations describe a horrific situation.
Rafah is still closed as a border crossing. World Food Programme bakeries in Rafah have all closed down for the lack of fuel and constant supplies being impossible. From the 7th to the 20th of May, not a single WFP truck crossed from the southern corridors.
Now, there are reports coming out of Egypt that their officials are set to meet with U.S. and Israeli counterparts on Sunday about reopening the Rafah crossing. David Baxter, Global News, Ottawa.
There are growing calls for the federal government to take action and enforce the law following a string of incidents this week that has left Canada's Jewish community shaken. A synagogue in Vancouver was the latest target of an attack the police say is being investigated as a possible hate crime. They suspect an accelerant was used to intentionally set a fire at the front door of the building. It comes after bullet holes were found at 2 Jewish schools in Toronto and Montreal. No one was hurt in any of the incidents. Mercedes Stephenson took the Jewish community's concerns directly to Canada's Justice Minister. Mercedes?
Neetu, over the past week, there have been 3 significant anti-Semitic attacks. Bullets fired into 2 Jewish schools and an incendiary device deployed at a synagogue. Canada's special envoy to combat anti-Semitism, Deborah Lyons, has come out with strong words for all levels of government, saying that they must do more. In a statement, Lyons says every level of government must use the levers at their disposal to deal with this emergency. That means enforcing the law, not allowing incidents of hate to go unanswered. I put Lyon's call for the government to, quote, enforce the law to Federal Justice Minister Arif Virani, and I asked him whether he feels that enough is being done to deal with these incidents.
So what your viewers should understand is that we now have a bill in the legislature that we want to see swift passage on that would actually help beef up the penalties for people who would incite hatred and willfully promote anti-Semitism and publicly promote hatred.
Do you feel that the police are doing enough right now, though? I realize that bill's before Parliament, but obviously this is unfolding in real time.
I think the police are doing everything they can to the best of their abilities. I've certainly engaged with a lot of the police forces around the country, particularly in my province of Ontario, about the acute need to be sensitive to issues of hatred and escalating hatred, and we're seeing rising incidents of anti-Semitism, we're seeing incidents of Islamophobia, we're seeing unfortunately targeted attacks also towards racialized groups, women, LGBTQ2 communities. These are all of concern. The statistics that I've been presented, particularly in the GTA region of Toronto, have been staggering, a 130% increase over the last 5 years. That demonstrates the need to act, the desire to act. What we're trying to do is act. We're also providing sources and funding through our most recent budget that will be dedicated towards curbing hatred, and that's about everything from educating crowns and police officers about how to identify hate, but also in terms of ensuring that there's judicial training in place in terms of how to adjudicate on hate.
We'll have more on the West Block with the Justice Minister, including a discussion about rising crime rates, changes to bail, and dealing with repeat offenders. Neithu?
All right, Mercedes Stevenson in Ottawa. Thanks, Mercedes. And as Mercedes mentioned, you can watch the entire interview with Arif Virani tomorrow morning on the West Block right here on Global. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is back in Asia to rally more support for his country's defense. Zelensky arrived in Singapore today for the Shangri-La Dialogue, an international security summit mostly attended by Asia-Pacific countries. He's hoping to garner their support for an upcoming peace summit against Russia's war. It will take place in Switzerland later this month. Zelensky will also meet with the U.S. Secretary of Defense to further discuss the battlefield situation in Ukraine.
I actually raised that concern of foreign interference and all the manifestations that it might take. I made it very clear that those actions by any foreign nation are unacceptable to Canada.
Defense Minister Bill Blair also at the summit. In a rare meeting with his Chinese counterpart, Blair warned Beijing against any attempts to interfere with Canadian institutions. This comes weeks after a foreign interference commission highlighted evidence by CSIS of countries like China meddling in Canada's last two elections, but ultimately not affecting the final results. Boeing's latest attempt to launch its Starliner spacecraft was scrubbed in the final minutes before liftoff today. It was not immediately clear why, but the spacecraft has never flown with astronauts on board, so the stakes are high. NASA has scheduled a backup launch for tomorrow, but as Jayme Doll reports, it's just another setback in a long list of delays and disruptions for Boeing.
All right, they're all zipped up.
You could almost feel the hearts pumping with every tick of the clock. History on the verge of being made.
Now, Sunny will be the first woman to test an orbital spacecraft.
Every system good to go.
Pneumatics.
Go.
LO2.
Go.
Water.
Go.
Even the final message from the astronauts strapped tightly in their seats.
Calypso, take us to space and back.
And with that, we are ready to go to space, Lauren.
Everyone held their breaths. The clock stopped.
The clock stopped at T-minus 3 minutes, 50 seconds.
The anticipation climbed, but it was the only thing that would get off the ground on Saturday in Cape Canaveral.
There you heard confirmation of the scrub call.
3 minutes and 50 seconds to liftoff. Dreams of the Boeing Starliner ferrying 2 astronauts to the International Space Station remain just that, a dream, still yet to be realized by NASA and Boeing.
We just heard an update from United Launch Alliance, who's the builder of the rocket. The ground launch sequencer, that's a computer that controls the terminal phase of the countdown, the final few minutes, obviously encountered a problem of some sort.
It's just the latest in a string of setbacks for the historic project and Boeing, which has dealt with years of delays due to mechanical and software issues and budget overruns. The initial first crewed launch attempt was scrubbed on May 6 after a valve issue.
It's really important to the company to get this thing off the ground successfully and get it back successfully. Had all kinds of problems with other parts of their management structure. So this one's kind of a very visible embarrassment, I would expect.
The Starliner would be a direct competitor with Elon Musk's SpaceX, which has been flying people to and from the space station for NASA since 2020. Dodge says unlike SpaceX, which lands in water, the Starliner would land in the Utah desert. But it needs to get out of Florida first. The next launch attempt could be as early as Sunday. Jayme Doll, Global News, Calgary.
South Africa's coalition challenge coming up with rival parties gaining momentum. The country's political landscape shifts for the first time post-apartheid. The final phase of the world's largest election came to an end today in India. Nearly 1 billion people were eligible to vote in the 6-week-long process, which began on April 19th. Tens of millions battled sweltering heat to cast their ballots in the final round of voting. At least 30 deaths have been attributed to the record-breaking temperatures since Friday. Incumbent Prime Minister Narendra Modi is widely expected to secure another term in office, with official results set to be announced on Tuesday. In South Africa, reaction is pouring in to what's already been a historic election. For the first time since the end of apartheid, the nation's leading party will be forced to form a coalition government. The African National Congress has held a majority in every election going back to 1994. But now the party of Nelson Mandela will be forced to work with a rival to stay in power. Kyle Benning has more on what led to the change and which parties could play kingmaker.
He's the face of a political change in South Africa, despite being very familiar with voters across the country. The newly formed MK party under former President Jacob Zuma has pulled enough support away from the African National Congress, or ANC, leaving the party with only 40% of the vote.
South Africans decided to vote for them, and it is quite good that here today we must now live with the choice that voters have made.
The ANC has formed majority governments for the last 3 decades, but public sentiment towards the party has been shifting. The Economic Freedom Fighters, or EFF, split from the leading party a decade ago, and now Zuma's MK have opened up options for voters frustrated by the ANC.
This is what's happening, so call us what you may, but MK light, yes, we are the lights to this darkness. Look at what is happening. Everyone's lights are switching on.
Among the reasons for the shift away from the ruling party include a lack of public funding on infrastructure and rising unemployment, particularly for younger voters.
Because it seems like alone they are failing us.
There's no infrastructure, there's no water, the electricity is cut off.
We are just hoping, Ruti, the leadership under the MK understands better what our youth needs.
The MK and EFF make up a combined 22% of the vote, showing dissatisfaction for the ANC, which collected more than 57% in the 2019 election. The big question that remains is what concessions the ANC will need to make to secure a coalition partner. The MK party and second-place conservative leading Democratic Alliance have both stated they would need to see a change at the top, with questions looming around President Cyril Ramaphosa. The EFF says it is willing to work with the ANC so long it advances a key policy on the expropriation of land without compensation.
Because ANC, when compromised, is not arrogant.
On Sunday, the Electoral Commission will announce the final results. Then it will be on the ANC to strike a deal with who will lead the coalition or force voters back to the polls. Kyle Benning, Global News, Toronto.
Rainbow flags filled the streets of Thailand's capital today as Pride celebrations kicked off there and elsewhere around the globe. Thailand is on course to become the first nation in Southeast Asia to legalize same-sex marriage, marking a significant social stride forward compared to the discrimination faced by the LGBTQ2+ community in Thailand a decade ago. The country's marriage equality bill overwhelmingly passed the upper house's first reading in April and is widely expected to be ratified by the country's Senate later this month, before being given royal assent by Thailand's king. Ahead, Temu, China's leading e-commerce app, is facing legal scrutiny over privacy concerns. Ticketmaster's parent company has confirmed it was hit by a data breach earlier this week after hackers claimed to have stolen the personal data of 560 million customers. In a regulatory filing to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, Live Nation says a criminal threat actor is offering to sell Ticketmaster data on the dark web, and the company is investigating. A group named Shiny Hunters has claimed responsibility for the attack. They're seeking $500,000 for the data, which could include customers' names, addresses, and credit card details. This week, the parent company of Temu dethroned Alibaba as China's most valuable e-commerce firm. The widely popular online shopping app is under scrutiny for the way it allegedly collects data from people who download it. Temu is currently facing 2 lawsuits in the U.S. as well as one in Canada. Anne Gaviola has more on why privacy experts, legal teams, and cybersecurity analysts are sounding the alarm about this app.
Feels like a dream, feels like magic.
Temu spent millions to advertise at the Super Bowl this year.
Like
the e-commerce app pulls out all the stops to entice new customers. It was the most downloaded app in the U.S. last year.
Buyer beware.
This criminologist and cybersecurity expert has analyzed the Temu app and has major concerns about user privacy because of its parent company, PDD Holdings, a Chinese online retailer. This app has seen explosive popularity since it came to the U.S. in 2022.
These companies are compelled by the CCP or the Chinese government to give over information. It should raise some alarms to users.
A Temu spokesperson tells Global News it has never provided user data to the Chinese government, nor would it do so if asked. Temu faces 2 proposed U.S. class action lawsuits and 1 proposed in Quebec, alleging it collects more data from its users than is necessary. The Quebec suit alleges location data about where you've been physically, as well as what you've browsed online. Plus, all your contact information and other things on your mobile device may be compromised if you've downloaded Temu, even if you've never purchased anything. Attorney Jeff Orenstein filed the case in March on behalf of anyone who has used Temu, as well as anyone they've interacted with since.
Some of the allegations are that even those communications can end up being intercepted, or private information being intercepted at the very least, and could potentially be shared with third parties.
In a statement to Global News, Temu says it categorically denies the allegations in these lawsuits and intends to vigorously defend against them. Temu says it only uses precise location services in the Middle East region, nowhere else. The company says it is transparent about its data practices, but like other e-commerce apps, it does work with third-party service providers and ensures they only have access to personal information needed to perform their functions and services. Nevertheless, Temu's strategy and business model is raising a lot of questions, both in Canada and the U.S. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
Next, how Portapic is transforming tragedy into triumph with a new community revival project. Today, mourners, including a who's who of dignitaries in Quebec, gathered for his funeral in downtown Montreal. Jean-Pierre Ferland was 89 years old. In April of 2020, a lone gunman went on a deadly rampage in Nova Scotia, killing 22 people over the span of 13 hours. It became the worst mass shooting in modern Canadian history. The carnage changed the lives of countless people. As Heidi Petrachik tells us, the small community where the violence began is now trying to redefine itself beyond the tragedy.
If you stand up for those down on the knees.
A song dedicated to Nova Scotians was the soundtrack for a day people here have needed for so long. Just down the road from this new community centre in rural Portapic is where the April 2020 mass shooting began. A lone gunman killing 22 people.
Jolene Oliver, Aaron Tuck, and Emily Tuck.
The names of those killed read out here today.
We all had a terrifying night, the night of the mass casualty.
Andrew McDonald is a survivor, shot by the perpetrator. He lived, and the Portapic resident wanted to turn fear into hope.
For us to redefine what this place is and not be defined by a couple hours of time was really important to us.
He and other volunteers looked to the community hall as the place to start. They decided to rebuild, taking century-old beams from the old one to become part of the new.
And then as people's asks got bigger and the need got bigger, the project got bigger, and it just kept growing and growing from there.
It's allowed the community to have a focal point, something positive to focus on, and it's really about changing the narrative around Portapique.
The space will be used for mental health supports, community gatherings, dances, a farmer's market. Almost $1.5 million in government funds and donations raised to make it happen.
There was healing in being able to do something.
And Portapique has been here for a long time, and it will continue to be here for a long time.
If you try to be the change,
the community focused on a brighter future instead of that brief window of darkness in the past. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Portapique, Nova Scotia.
And that is Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. Tonight's Your Canada is the East Block of Parliament Hill in Ottawa. We love seeing your Canada. Please keep emailing your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks so much for watching and hope you'll join us again tomorrow. Have a great night.